Good morning or afternoon. I'm Jen Wilson. Welcome to Leadership Lunch Chat with my good friend, Amy Vetter. Hi, Amy.
Hello. Happy Friday.
You too. Today, Amy and I want to talk about self-protection or selfish interest, protecting our selfish interest and the lack of transparency and authenticity that can cause. We're running into it right and left. At the partner level, at the next gen talent level, operational leaders, clients, everybody's trying to protect something and they're not talking about what it is, or they want something to happen and they're not causing it to happen by expressing their desire. And, of course, Amy and I are in the facilitation business, so we get hired to come in and try to present some of that. But what we find is that people don't necessarily follow us in. They tell us their truth, but then they don't want to say it at the table or in the room. And so we thought we'd try to explore, why that might be, what the costs of it are, and why leaders say what needs to be said. So Amy, do you want to jump in here and start?
Yeah. So I think, and granted, some of this comes from the fact that, and this happens in many industries, but especially I think in professional service type industries and what we see in accounting firms, is that people get elevated in their roles because of their technical expertise and the work that they do. But what they're not getting promoted for are their people skills, their management skills, how they lead. And there's training for that. And that is just as important as the technical skills, because whether we're working with a group of leaders to really help mobilize the leadership team, or we're working with staff, we have to be okay with being the bad guy sometimes and saying the hard things in the room and not worrying about that we might not be liked because of it, and just trying to hold on to what we are holding on to. And secondly, I think what happens is, when we get maybe in these partnership roles and so forth, we start getting a certain level of responsibility, but it might not be our strength. And we don't want to give that up because we like to have everything under our name, but we're also not willing to get trained or be humble to really figure out, how you can improve in those other things beyond client work. And it's really getting honest with yourself of, where am I best suited? Am I best suited as a client facing person or technical person, or am I best suited as a people person and a leader? And if I am a leader, what am I going to do to bring people together where I'm not just thinking about me, I'm thinking about we, and I am thinking about the firm and the organization as a corporation rather than my line of business or book of business or what I'm trying to protect as far as my ego and so forth, versus where am I best suited, and everybody really being honest about that.
Wow, a lot to unpack. Where to start? So off of that, I think I'm going to pick up the thread with the idea of, I need to say what needs to be said. I don't know how to say it. I'm afraid to say it. We tell people all the time, write down your possibilities or your hopes. I hope for this firm that we will what? It's possible that we could do X and shift the turnover or shift the capacity issue or increase our throughput or whatever, right? So what's my hope? What's my possibility? What am I wanting to make happen? A lot of next gen talent right now are trying to drive culling initiatives, and so are operational personnel. Let's fire some clients. In fact, our team is about to put out a series of memes. I declared at a speaking engagement recently, October 21st is National Fire a Client Day. Trying to get everybody October 21st right after the fall busy season and before we get into that awkward space where you can't fire them for spring, fire some clients. But, so people want to have clients fired, let's say, and they really feel strongly about it. But, when it comes time to discuss it in the small room, there's a lot of resistance. And the people that most want it to happen may not be, expressing their argument, and saying, hey, I think you're saying all those things, but you're not doing it. And we need to fire clients. And I think you're not doing it because you're holding on to them for comp or for deferred compensation or whatever. They don't want to say that. So they stay silent and just kind of simmer and stuff it and get frustrated. And what ends up happening there is that, either finally I get so sick of these things that I'm not expressing that are not changing because I'm not talking about them, that I finally break down and have some kind of, physical issue, or I quit my job. Maybe those are the possible outcomes, but there's also another outcome. And that is that I blow like Mount St. Helens and inappropriately handle this. So what I was trying to resist saying, because I was afraid I would make you mad, I barf lava all over you later because I'm so mad about it or so frustrated or so sick of it. And I'm not professional and I'm ashamed of how I handled it. And, so, when we hold on to this stuff, bad things happen. And for sure, the number one bad thing is nothing changes.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of what we see too is everyone talking behind each other's back, but not to each other's face, and so, these are hard conversations to have. And, walking away in a different room saying, well, this person just won't let go of that client and we're stuck, is not actually going to solve the issue. Part of being a leader is making those hard decisions, and there really shouldn't be emotion attached to it. It should be a criteria. There should be an agreed upon criteria with everyone that's negotiated and so forth. And things are surfaced and have the right sequence of events where there is a stop loss if maybe it's with the wrong person or someone hasn't disciplined that client appropriately to make sure that it's staying within scope, and you've got that process to go through. But what I see too much is dealing with conflict is the thing that everyone shies away from. So even in the aspect of, take another example of staff feedback, when we talk about losing staff, we actually have a good amount of staff in our firms. And if you really go around to talk to them, there's a bunch of people that aren't completely overloaded or full with work. And part of what happens is they get branded as people that aren't as good as others, or someone's, gotten in with a manager or partner and so forth, and they're busier. And so we go through an evaluation process and we give this person an evaluation, but because we're not good, we don't want to give negative feedback, or we haven't been trained in how to give productive, feedback to somebody, constructive feedback to help them, and have a system in place to monitor, to see that they've improved, that they've taken in the feedback, that they've done the training or whatever has been assigned. What I see is that they're not giving the feedback. So they might just tell them, yeah, you were fine. But when they're behind closed doors, they're talking against those staff people or saying they don't want a certain person on their job and so forth. So it's not a lack of staff. It's a lack of really taking the time to give the right feedback and the right support and nurturing, so that you can actually grow people from inside the firm and not just write them off because they had, a bad engagement, or they didn't show up in the way that you hoped that they would show up, but they might be willing to learn. And we have to be okay to say the hard stuff, to give people, it's better that we give them the honest feedback than them, coming into the culture and starting to be negative because they're not getting the help that they need to thrive.
Yes. Well, and that's just a lack of people development and a commitment to that. Or if they really are horrible and everybody has tried, then they should come off the roster and go to work somewhere else. And that way we would have an accurate head count and an accurate hours capacity projection instead of this inaccurate one, which has, what you might consider to be, hampered hours or something, these hours that are fake. that we think are available, but no one will use that person. We call those people people that live on the do not use list. And every firm, when I teach about it and talk about it, every firm, everybody will laugh, like, that awkward, painful laugh of the truth. And that's so gross, like if we have a do not use list, how about they're not working here?
Right.
So anyway, yeah, just this whole fear of saying what needs to be said. Now, a few minutes ago, Amy, you started with language, and you said we language, not I language. And man, I, me, my language, the only time to use that is when you're going to express a concern you have with someone else and you're going to talk about the impacts or the feelings that it generated. And then you're going to say something like, my feelings were hurt when you said that in the meeting in front of others, instead of you hurt my feelings, right? So I, me, my is over here when I'm taking responsibility for a problem and I want you to take a look at it and I don't want to poke you in the chest. I use you language if I want to make a direct request, not a criticism, or if I want to give credit, which we should be doing. Something goes well, we say, wow, team, you did a great job, not wow, team, I did a great job and so did you, or something like that. I, me, my language, we have to watch it. And so a lot of times people just don't know how to frame it or phrase it or what to say. And there's all these different feedback frameworks. We teach 4. They're out on our website. We blog about them. You can, just go to convergencecoaching.com/blog and type the word feedback in the search box, and you'll get tons of resources to give you actual, word frameworks that you could use that would help you to say what needs to be said. But the key is to get it up and out, not to stuff it down, because it's going to cause problems for you, yourself, and the way you feel, and for the business. And there's no way around it. What you're trying to resist is causing problems for the business. That's why you're being quiet. And it's going to cause double the problems to be silent.
Yeah. And I think an important thing just along those lines with giving feedback is really getting present with yourself before you give feedback and making sure there isn't anything that has to do with you yourself that you're giving the feedback about. It's always about what's best for the company or the firm. So, I think where feedback goes wrong a lot of times are the personal attack. I always say this, and I do think it can be attack, especially when, in women's situations of telling other women, well, you really shouldn't be wearing that. You should be wearing this. And that's not productive feedback, because that's your personal opinion. And unless it's really inappropriate, telling someone else what they should wear isn't going to help them in their career, right? What helps them is you heard them speaking in front of a room, or you're about to go into a meeting and they're going to present, and you're giving them tips before they go to present of, make sure you address this because this person's in the room, and make sure you address this because this person's in the room. And after the meeting, giving them feedback right away to say, this is what was really good. This is what you should think about for next time when you put this together, and you won't get those types of questions. But it's giving that real-time feedback so people understand how to improve themselves and their skills, rather than something that might just be a personal preference of yours, or something that is a belief system that maybe worked for your generation, but isn't applicable to the generation today. And so that's a really hard thing to step back and just make sure, like, where is the feedback coming from? Or is it a personal thing that maybe I'm not the right person to give the feedback, that I should really talk to somebody else that might have a better way of framing that feedback that's not going to come from a personal preference, or will give the feedback because I'm not good at speaking up.
Yes. Or will help me see where my selfish interest is clouding my judgment.
Yes.
Or will help me get unhooked emotionally so I don't use absolutes like always and never. And I don't, use blame words, and I don't end up like botching it because of the way I delivered it. We
Mhm.
tell people all the time, you've got to get unhooked somehow. And a third party can do that for you. If you want to complain about somebody or something in your firm, do it with the intent or the commitment to resolve the matter, not just to barf it up and dump it on somebody's plate and leave. But instead to go get that help on how do I address this, or what would be the best way to say this, or who should I bring this issue to? And for next gen talent, I tell them all the time, I'll say, well, why aren't you saying this in these meetings? And they'll say, well, Jen, I'm waiting to get equity partnership before I discuss that. I think that the buy sell is too rich and will bankrupt the business. And I'm like, so wait a minute, you're going to buy into the business with a with a sales price that you think is inappropriate before you bring up that the sales price is inappropriate.
All right.
So I'm like, wait, this isn't making sense. And so then I've been saying, I've been trying to say to these next gen folks, so what's going to happen? What are you afraid will happen when you raise these issues? Like, let's talk about, list your fears. They won't give me equity. They'll fire me. They won't include me in meetings, and I'm like, but you are the future of the firm. They need you. They need you more than you need them.
Yeah.
So, and if you're constructive and you're coming from your love of firm and your desire for sustainability of this asset that they've built, and you are genuinely committed to the organization, then how could they hear you as anything but somebody they better lean in and figure out how to help? And if they're not smart enough to do that after you have constructively raised the issues, and they're going to make you wrong or make you feel bad or whatever, stop and think about whether these are business partners you want to have. There's plenty of opportunities with groups that would listen to your feedback, that are open to the change ideas that you have. Now, I'm not encouraging that you leave your firm, because I think most firm leaders, from my experience, are open to the feedback. So we're just sitting silently, like biting our nails to the quick, scared to give it, without actual validity to the fears that we have. The things we're afraid will happen are fabricated, they're dramatic, they're fictional. They could happen, but the chances are slim. And what would happen? What are the possibilities if they listened? And isn't it worth it to risk it?
Well, and I do think it's the environment which we kind of started off with, that we create to allow for that upward feedback to happen. Because what I see too much is gossip happening behind closed doors, kind of ripping on people, ripping it. If another partner's in the room, not in the room, that partner's getting ripped on. So part of what prevents someone from giving that feedback is, it's like being the bully on the playground, and you don't want to be the one that they're after next and talking about and so forth. So I really, the problem is our brains naturally tend to the negative, and it's the thing that we can talk about the most. So if we're in a room with a bunch of people, we can talk about a person that we think is failing, or we didn't like their idea or whatever, for 30 minutes. And someone that's doing really good, it's like, yeah, they're doing really good. There's not as much that's being said about
there's no juice in that.
No juice. There's no gossip about that, right? Like, we'd have to actually talk about something productive after that statement, and how could we get more of that, and so forth. And so, I would just send that out as, a leadership, especially when we talk about generous leadership, is really observing your meetings that are happening, and maybe just take this next week to observe. Don't contribute. Just watch what people are saying, how people are talking to one another, what they're saying about other people. And is this the environment that you want to create in the firm? Because what happens is, even when we think that's happening behind closed doors, people hear about it, or there might be an administrative person in the room that tells people that this was a conversation that was happening, and so forth. And so then you actually prevent ideas from coming up or people even trying to approach something because they don't want to be the butt of the joke. They don't, want to be insulted when actually they had something productive that they could have added to the conversation, or they don't want to be made fun of later. So I would just put that out as a challenge, is to observe and just see what kind of conversations are happening behind closed doors, and if you agree with what those are when you're not a part of it.
And all of that, teasing and jabbing and all that stuff's called sludge. And it has no place in any positive culture workplace or really family group or community. It's a gross old school habit, and should be, carefully, constructively pointed out. It might be your first piece of feedback that you're going to practice from this conversation that we just had, is to notice, as Amy suggested, and then to point it out and say, hey guys, I think we're mudslinging a little bit. We're throwing sludge at one another. And it's not an environment that's constructive and will foster innovation and change. It's one that is going to keep us small and, frankly, behind.
Yeah.
So that might be your first piece of feedback. And if you ever want any help from Amy or I, you can email us or connect with us in social and message us and say, here's my circumstance and here's what I think I'm going to say. And I know either one of us would gladly respond back with some feedback or ideas for you. We care about positive change in this universe for sure. We're trying to drive it ourselves. It only happens when we have courage to speak up, when we're willing to be vulnerable to the risk that other people will not accept or love our ideas. But when you express them, some people will hear them and they will come along. And that's called leadership. And that's what we're all about. So we'll be here, I think, next Friday together. I think we've got the next few Fridays together without interruption. And so tune in at noon Eastern next Friday for another Leadership Lunch Chat. Amy, as always, it was a pleasure. And Caroline, thanks so much for everything. See y'all.